The morning started like any other Saturday, quiet and warm. The smell of coffee filled the air and soft sunlight slipped through the curtains. She stood by the sink, humming an old tune while washing the breakfast dishes. It was their 5th wedding anniversary, and she felt thankful. Things had not been perfect, but they had made it through many ups and downs together. Her husband was sitting on the couch, pretending to scroll through his phone, though he kept glancing at her. He had something planned, something he was sure would make her smile. For weeks he had been thinking about how to surprise her. He wasn't a man who often showed his feelings with words, so he thought a small gift would do the job. The day before, he had stopped by a bakery on his way home from work. It wasn't just any bakery. It was one of those fancy ones that wrapped cakes in gold paper and tied them with ribbons. He had picked out her favorite flavor, red velvet covered with smooth cream cheese icing and delicate little roses on top. When he saw the price, his heart almost skipped a beat, but he told himself it was worth it. After all, she deserved something special. Now, as he watched her wipe her hands and dry the plates, he smiled quietly to himself. He imagined the look on her face when she saw the cake. Surprise, maybe even happy tears. He wanted to remind her that he still loved her, even when life got busy, even when money was tight. When she finished cleaning, he called out from the couch, "Hey, can you come here for a second?" She looked up, drying her hands on a towel. "What's going on?" she asked, smiling. "Just come," he said, trying to sound casual but feeling like a kid hiding a secret. She walked over, curious. He stood up and went to the kitchen counter, where he had hidden the cake box behind a bag of groceries. He turned around slowly, holding it out to her. "Happy anniversary," he said, his grin wide and proud. Her eyes softened at first, touched by the gesture. "Oh, you remembered," she said quietly, taking the box in her hands. "Of course I did," he replied. "Open it." She lifted the lid carefully. Inside was a beautiful red velvet cake, bright and elegant, almost too perfect to eat. The little sugar roses looked like something from a magazine. She smiled, but then her eyes caught something on the side of the box, a small price tag still stuck to the corner. She squinted and read it. Her smile faded slightly. He noticed the change right away. "What's wrong?" he asked. She hesitated. "How much did you spend on this?" He shrugged. "Does it matter? It's our anniversary." She looked at him again, a bit of worry in her eyes. "You know we're already tight this month. The rent is due, and you said your check came late." "It's fine," he said quickly, his tone sharper than he intended. "It's just a cake." She sighed softly, trying not to sound ungrateful. "I appreciate it, really, but you could have just bought a small one. We don't need to spend that much on something we'll eat in one night." Her words were gentle, but something inside him stirred. Pride, maybe frustration. He had worked extra hours just to afford that cake, and now she was talking about the price. "So that's it?" he said, his voice rising slightly. "I try to do something nice for you, and you're worried about the cost?" She shook her head. "No, I'm not saying that. I just don't want us to stress later. You know how things have been." He laughed bitterly. "You always find a problem with everything I do. Always talking about bills, saving, cutting back. Can't we just enjoy one thing without turning it into a discussion about money?" Her face tightened, not in anger, but in hurt. "You think I don't want to enjoy things? I just care about our future. I want us to be okay." The air between them grew heavy. The cake, once a symbol of love, now sat between them like a silent witness. He felt his chest tighten with a mix of disappointment and shame. He had expected her to smile, maybe even hug him, not lecture him about expenses. "I just thought you'd be happy," he muttered, staring at the floor. "I am happy you thought of me," she said softly, "but we have to be smart. Love isn't about how much we spend, it's about what we share." He turned away, his pride burning. In his mind, her words sounded like criticism. He felt small, like all his effort didn't matter. His throat tightened, and he muttered under his breath, "You just don't get it." She stepped closer. "What did you say?" "Nothing," he replied, though his tone carried heat. "Look," she said, trying to calm things down. "I didn't mean to upset you. I just wish you'd told me before buying it. We could have picked something together." That sentence, we could have picked something together, Iguidra was the one that pushed him over the edge. It made him feel like he had failed even at being thoughtful. He felt foolish for thinking he could surprise her, foolish for spending money they didn't have. Without thinking clearly, frustration took control. He grabbed the cake box from the counter and held it for a moment as if deciding what to do. She looked at him, eyes wide in disbelief. "What are you doing?" she asked softly. Before she could say another word, he tossed the box toward the table. The cake slid halfway out, hitting the edge, and splattered across the tablecloth and floor. A bit of icing landed on her sleeve and cheek. She froze. The room went silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. He stood there, breathing hard, realizing what he had done. It wasn't a violent act, but it was careless, disrespectful, and painful. Her face, calm yet stunned, made his stomach drop. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just stood there staring at the mess, then at him. Her eyes were filled not with anger, but deep disappointment, the kind that says more than any words ever could. He tried to speak, but couldn't find the right words.
"I didn't mean," he began. She raised her hand gently.
"Don't," she whispered. "Just don't." She walked slowly to the sink, took a towel, and started wiping the icing off her sleeve. Her movements were calm, almost too calm. He expected her to explode, to throw something back, but she didn't. Instead, she said softly, "You worked hard for that cake, and now look at it." He stood still, guilt crashing through him like a wave. He had wanted to make her happy, but instead he had turned a celebration into a memory they'd both want to forget. She wiped the table quietly, her hands steady, though her heart felt heavy. The smell of red velvet and sugar filled the room, a sweet scent that suddenly felt bitter. When she finished cleaning the table, she placed the ruined cake box on the counter and turned to him. "I'm going for a walk," she said quietly. He wanted to stop her, to apologize, to take back what just happened, but his pride wouldn't let him move. He just watched as she picked up her purse and walked out the door. The sound of the door closing echoed in the silence. He looked around, the crumbs on the table, the icing smeared across the floor, the empty space where she had been standing, and realized how foolish he had been. He sat down slowly, his hands covering his face. The anger that had felt so strong minutes ago now turned into regret. He wished he could rewind the moment, swallow his pride, and just listen. Outside, she walked down the quiet street, the cool air brushing against her skin. She didn't cry, though her chest ached. She wasn't angry, just deeply hurt. She thought about how love could sometimes get lost between stress and pride. She thought about how they had promised each other patience, but somewhere along the way, both had forgotten what that meant. Back at home, he stared at the clock again. The minutes felt like hours. He kept hearing her voice, calm, soft, steady, and it cut deeper than if she had shouted. When she finally returned that evening, he was still sitting there. The cake was gone, the table clean, but the tension lingered. He wanted to apologize, but didn't know how to start. She walked past him quietly and went to the bedroom. As the night settled in, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The memory of the cake, and the one he had bought to show love, kept replaying in his mind. He realized then that sometimes love wasn't about grand gestures, but small understanding, and that one careless act could hurt more than words ever could. The day had started with a surprise, but it ended with silence, the kind of silence that makes you face yourself. The next morning, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, just heavy. He woke up early, staring at the ceiling for a long time before getting out of bed. The sunlight coming through the curtains seemed dull, like even the day knew something wasn't right. He went to the kitchen and looked around. The table was spotless. She must have cleaned everything before going to bed. The red velvet crumbs were gone, but he could still smell the faint sweetness of the cake. That smell made his chest tighten with guilt. She wasn't in the bedroom anymore. Her side of the bed was neatly made and her shoes were gone. He checked the living room and saw her jacket missing from the hanger. She must have gone out for a walk again. He sat down at the kitchen table, his mind replaying the night before like a movie he couldn't turn off. The look on her face kept flashing before his eyes. Calm, disappointed, hurt. Not angry, just broken inside. He had thrown away not just a cake, but the peace in their home. When the front door finally opened, he looked up quickly. She stepped in, holding a paper bag. She had gone to the corner store. Her face looked tired, but she wasn't crying. She just looked distant, like her thoughts were somewhere else. "Morning," he said quietly. She nodded. "Morning." Her voice was soft but cold. He wanted to apologize right away, but the words stuck in his throat. Every time he thought of what to say, it sounded small compared to what he had done. She took out milk and bread from the bag, placed them on the counter, and started making breakfast. The sound of the frying pan filled the room, but they didn't speak. It was strange. After years of sharing laughter and chatter, now they couldn't even look at each other for more than a second. He finally gathered courage. "I'm sorry about last night," he said. "She didn't stop cooking." "I know," she said simply. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he continued. I was frustrated." She placed the spatula down and turned to him. "Frustrated about what? That I care about our money? That I want us to be okay?" Her words weren't harsh, just tired. He rubbed his forehead. "No, I know you mean well. I just wanted to do something nice for once. Everything's been about bills and stress lately. I thought maybe one small surprise could remind us that we still have something to smile about." She looked at him for a moment, her expression softening a little. "You could have reminded me with words or with time, not with money we don't have." "I know," he said quietly. "I messed up," she sighed, turning back to the stove. "I wasn't angry about the cake," she said after a pause. "I was hurt because you threw it. That cake wasn't just money, it was effort. Yours and mine. It was something you worked for and you wasted it out of anger. That's what hurt the most," he couldn't argue. She was right. After breakfast, they sat in silence again. The TV was on, but neither of them was watching. It was one of those mornings where words felt heavy, like walking through mud. Every sentence took effort. She finally stood up, grabbed her purse, and said she needed to run errands. He nodded, even though he wanted her to stay. As she left, he realized how much her absence changed everything. The house didn't feel like home without her presence. Hours passed. He tried to distract himself by cleaning the garage, fixing a broken shelf, doing anything that would keep his hands busy. But no matter what he did, his mind kept going back to that moment, the cake sliding off the box, the icing on her cheek, the silence afterward. By the afternoon, she came back home. She looked calmer but distant still. She placed a small grocery bag on the counter again. Inside were eggs, sugar, and cocoa powder. He frowned slightly. "What's all that for?" She didn't answer right away. She took out the ingredients, set them neatly on the counter, and said, "I thought I'd bake something." He blinked, surprised. "You're baking?" She nodded. "Yeah, I need to clear my head." He watched as she tied her apron, mixed flour in a bowl, and cracked the eggs. Her movements were quiet, slow, peaceful, almost like she was letting out her feelings with every stir. He wanted to help, but he didn't want to interrupt. The smell of cocoa soon filled the room, rich and warm. It reminded him of the early days of their marriage when they used to bake together just for fun. Back then, everything was simple. They didn't have much money, but they had laughter. He finally walked over. "Can I help?" She looked at him briefly, then nodded toward the counter. "You can butter the pan." He smiled faintly, grateful for the chance. They worked side by side in silence, but this silence felt different. Not heavy, just quiet. He kept glancing at her, wondering how she could be so calm after what he had done. When the cake was ready to go into the oven, she set the timer and leaned against the counter. For a long time, neither spoke. The smell of chocolate filled the kitchen, wrapping the air with a soft comfort. He finally said, "You didn't have to do this." She looked at him, her eyes tired but gentle. "I know, but sometimes doing something kind helps me heal faster than staying angry." He lowered his gaze. "You're too good to me," she gave a small smile. "Maybe, but that doesn't mean what happened was okay." "I know," he said. "I'll do better. I promise," and she nodded but didn't respond. They sat at the table together as the cake baked. The ticking of the timer filled the silence. For the first time in 2 days, it felt like something was shifting. Not back to normal, but toward something hopeful. When the cake came out, she cut a small slice and placed it on a plate. "Taste it," she said. He took a bite. It was rich and sweet, the flavor melting in his mouth. "It's good," he said softly. She smiled faintly.
"Good. Maybe next time we can make one together." That simple sentence felt like forgiveness.
Not a full one, but a start. Later that night, they ate dinner quietly. He noticed how she kept glancing at him, maybe checking if he really meant what he said earlier. He did. He wanted to fix things, to make her trust that he could handle frustration without hurting her. Before bed, he turned to her and said, "I'm sorry again. I know words don't fix things, but I'll prove it. She looked at him, her eyes softer than before. Actions matter more, she said quietly. Just remember that, he nodded. I will. She turned off the lamp and lay down, closing her eyes. For a while, they just listened to the soft hum of the fan. He wanted to say more, but sometimes silence carried more meaning than words. As he drifted off, he realized something. Her silence that morning hadn't been cold. It had been protective. She wasn't trying to punish him. She was giving herself space to breathe, to calm down before saying something she'd regret. That kind of patience was something he'd never understood before. The next day, she left a small piece of chocolate cake on the table before going to work. There was a little note beside it that read, "Forgiveness starts small." He stared at the note for a long time, his chest tight with emotion. It wasn't just a slice of cake, and it was her way of saying she hadn't given up on him. He picked up his phone, typed a message, then erased it. Words didn't seem enough. Instead, he walked to the sink, cleaned the dishes she had left, and made sure the kitchen sparkled before she came home. It was a small act, but it felt right. That evening, when she walked in, she noticed the clean counter and smiled just a little. You cleaned, she said. Yeah, he replied quietly. It's a start, she nodded. It's a good start. They stood there for a moment, the kind of silence that didn't hurt anymore, the kind that felt like healing. He realized then that love wasn't just about gifts or surprises. It was about moments like this, the quiet rebuilding, the unspoken forgiveness, the effort to make tomorrow better than yesterday. And as they shared the last piece of chocolate cake together that night, he silently promised himself never to let anger destroy something so fragile again. The week after the argument felt different in the house. The tension that had once filled every room was slowly fading, replaced by a quiet effort to move forward. They didn't talk much about the cake incident anymore, but it hung in the background like a shadow, something both of them could still feel, even if they didn't mention it. He had been trying to make things right in small ways. He'd wake up early to make her coffee, wash the dishes before she got home, and leave little notes on the fridge that said things like, "Hope you smile today," or "Thank you for staying." He didn't know if those things made a difference, but he wanted her to see that he was trying, she noticed. Every time she saw one of those notes, her heart softened a little more. But still, she was careful. She wanted to see change that lasted, not just apologies that faded after a few days. One evening, she came home from work looking exhausted. Her shoes clicked softly on the kitchen tiles as she set her bag down. He looked up from the table where he'd been going through some bills. You look tired, he said gently. She smiled faintly. It was a long day. A meeting ran late. He stood up. Sit down. I made dinner. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. You cooked? He chuckled nervously. Well, I tried. It's just pasta and salad. Nothing fancy. She laughed softly for the first time in days. That's already more than enough. They ate together quietly. The food wasn't perfect. The pasta was slightly overcooked and the sauce a bit salty. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were sitting together again, without sharp words or heavy silence. After dinner, they cleaned up side by side. As she was drying the dishes, he turned to her and said, There's something I've been thinking about. She looked at him curiously. What is it? I realized I never actually made it up to you, he said. Not really. I said sorry, but I didn't show it in a way that means something. She tilted her head slightly. You've been trying. I see that, I know, he said. But I want to do something different. Something to remind us that we can still make good memories, even after what happened. She didn't say anything at first, just waited for him to continue. He smiled nervously. So I want to bake another cake. Together this time. Her eyes widened slightly. Another cake? Yeah, he said, scratching the back of his neck. It sounds silly, I know, but maybe it can be our way of starting over. She looked at him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, she said softly. Let's do it. The next evening, they went to the store together. It had been a while since they'd gone shopping side by side like that. They laughed over little things, like him trying to pick the wrong kind of flour or dropping a pack of eggs. It felt light again, almost like old times. When they got home, they spread everything out on the counter, flour, sugar, butter, cocoa, and eggs. He pulled out a bowl while she measured the ingredients carefully. Don't overmix it this time, she warned playfully. You always make it too thick, he laughed. I'll try my best, chef. For the next hour, the kitchen was filled with warmth and laughter. He accidentally got flour on his face, and she giggled while trying to wipe it off. The sweet smell of chocolate soon filled the air, just like the week before, but this time it wasn't heavy with regret. It was warm and comforting. As the cake baked, they sat at the table sipping tea. The soft ticking of the oven timer filled the room. He looked at her carefully. "I still feel bad, you know," he said quietly. She nodded. "I know you do." "I keep thinking about how easily I lost my temper," he said. "You didn't deserve that." She looked at him, her eyes calm. "We all lose control sometimes. What matters is what we learn from it." He smiled sadly. "I learned a lot, mostly about how much I take you for granted." She didn't respond right away. She reached out, took his hand, and said, "You're learning. That's what matters to me." The oven timer dinged, breaking the silence. She stood up and opened the door carefully. The cake had risen perfectly, a deep, soft brown with a smooth top. She placed it on the counter to cool. He looked at it and grinned. "That looks amazing," she smiled. "See what happens when we work together?" He nodded. "Yeah, maybe that's the secret, teamwork." As she spread the frosting on top, he watched her quietly. The way she moved, patient, gentle, focused, made him realize how lucky he was. He had almost ruined something so precious with one moment of pride. When the cake was ready, she cut 2 slices and handed him one. "Here," she said softly. "The first bite goes to you this time." He took the plate, his eyes meeting hers. "Thank you." They both took a bite at the same time. The sweetness filled the room, not just from the cake, but from the silence that followed, the peaceful kind that only comes when 2 hearts start healing. After they finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You know, I didn't think I'd want to bake again after what happened, but I'm glad we did." "Me too," he said. "It feels new. Like we hit reset," she nodded. "Sometimes that's what love needs. A restart." Later that night, after cleaning the kitchen, they sat on the couch together. The TV was on, but neither of them was paying attention. He looked at her and said quietly, "You amaze me, you know that?" She smiled. "Oh, why?" "Because after everything I did, you still find a way to be kind." She looked at him for a moment before replying. "Kindness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing peace over anger." He nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. "I want to learn to be more like that." She laughed softly. "Then you'd be me, and one of us is already enough." He grinned. "Maybe, but I can try." They both laughed, the kind of laugh that sounds real, the kind that says things are finally okay. As the night went on, the warmth of the oven still lingered in the air. The cake sat on the counter, half-eaten, but it wasn't just dessert anymore. It had become a symbol of forgiveness, of second chances, of 2 people learning to hold each other's hearts more gently. Before bed, she took a small piece of the cake and placed it in a container. "I'm taking this to work tomorrow," she said with a small smile. "Maybe it'll remind me to stay sweet even when things get hard." He smiled back. "And maybe it'll remind me that patience tastes better than pride." She nodded. "Exactly." That night, as they lay side by side, he reached out and held her hand. For the first time since the fight, he felt a calm sense of peace. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from understanding. He thought about how easily anger could destroy something that took years to build, and how forgiveness could rebuild it with just a few kind gestures. He knew now that love wasn't just about the big moments. It was in these quiet nights, shared smiles, and second chances. The next morning, she woke up early and found him already in the kitchen again. He had brewed her coffee and was packing her lunch for work. "Good morning," she said softly, smiling. "Morning," he replied. "Coffee's ready." She took a sip, her eyes warm. "You're really trying, huh?" He nodded. "I told you actions matter." She smiled. "They do." As she walked out the door, she turned back and said, "Thank you for last night." "It meant a lot," he smiled. "Thank you for giving me another chance." When the door closed behind her, he looked at the half-eaten cake on the counter. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, messy, sweet, and full of lessons. He realized that love wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about learning from them, growing together, and choosing to stay, even when things got hard. And for the first time in a long while, he felt proud, not because he bought something expensive or did something big, but because he had finally learned what love truly meant. Next few days felt lighter. The air inside the house wasn't filled with silence anymore, but something gentler. the quiet rhythm of two people trying again. They laughed a little more, talked about small things, and slowly found their way back to each other. But even though things seemed fine on the surface, he still felt a small weight inside. It was the kind of guilt that didn't disappear easily. He knew that saying sorry once wasn't enough. He wanted her to really see that he understood how deeply his actions had hurt her, not just for that moment, but for what it represented: carelessness, pride, and losing control over something that didn't even matter. One evening after dinner, as they sat together on the couch, he turned off the TV and said quietly, "Can we talk for a minute?" She looked at him curiously. Of course, he took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what happened, really thinking about it. And I realized it wasn't just about the cake. It was about me not knowing how to handle my feelings. I let frustration speak for me, and that's not fair to you." She stayed quiet, listening. Her eyes were soft, not angry. That gave him courage to continue. "I grew up in a house where people didn't talk about their feelings," he said. "If you were upset, you just shouted or walked away. I guess I carried some of that into this marriage without realizing it. But that's not what I want for us," she nodded slowly. "It takes a lot to admit that," she said softly. "I can see you're trying to understand yourself." He looked down at his hands. "I just hate that you had to be hurt for me to learn it." She reached over and took his hand. "What matters is that you're learning now," she said. "We all make mistakes. What defines us is what we do after." Her words touched him deeply. He squeezed her hand gently, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. For the first time in a long while, he felt like she truly saw him, not as someone who had messed up, but as someone who was trying to grow. The next morning, he woke up early again. But instead of coffee or cleaning, he decided to do something else. He found an old notebook on the shelf and began writing. Not letters or poems, just thoughts. What he felt, what he regretted, what he wanted to do better. Page after page, he poured out the things he had never said out loud. When she woke up and saw him writing at the table, she smiled. "What's all that?" she asked. He looked up. "Just something for me. A way to think clearer, I guess." She nodded approvingly. "That's good. Writing helps." He smiled back. And she could tell something in him was changing. That day, while she was at work, he cleaned the entire house, not because she asked him to, but because he wanted to show care through action. He fixed a loose door handle, watered her plants, even organized the drawers. When she came home, she looked around in surprise. "You did all this today?" she asked. He shrugged lightly. "Yeah, I had time," she smiled, shaking her head. "You're full of surprises lately," he laughed. "Good ones this time, I hope." "Definitely better than last time," she said with a teasing grin. They both laughed, and that laughter felt like healing. Later that evening, they sat outside on the small porch watching the sunset. The sky was painted in soft oranges and pinks, and the air smelled like rain from earlier in the day. She looked thoughtful as she sipped her tea. "You know," she said, "when you threw that cake, I wasn't just hurt because of what you did. I was scared." He turned to her. "Scared?" She nodded. "Not of you, but of what that moment could mean. I kept wondering if we were turning into those couples who stop listening to each other, who love each other but still hurt each other because of pride." He swallowed hard. "I thought the same thing after you left that night. I sat there wondering how I could have let something so small turn into something that big." She looked at him gently. "Maybe we both learned something." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think we did." The air between them felt still, peaceful. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just watched the fading sun. After a while, he stood up and went inside. When he came back, he was holding a small box. She looked at it curiously. "What's that?" He smiled shyly. "Nothing fancy. Just something I wanted to give you." She hesitated, then took the box and opened it. Inside was a small note and a silver keychain with a heart-shaped charm. The note read, "This is for the days I forget what matters. You in this home. I never want to lose sight of that again." She stared at the note for a long moment, her eyes glistening. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. "I wanted to," he said softly. "It's not about the gift. It's about remembering." She smiled, tears forming but not falling. "It's beautiful." "Thank you." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You're the one who's beautiful," he said quietly. She laughed gently. "You're getting better at this," he grinned. "Learning from the best." That night they had dinner on the porch again. The sky had turned dark and the stars were scattered above them. They talked about simple things and old memories, funny moments, plans for the future. It felt easy again the way it used to be. At one point she leaned her head on his shoulder and said, "You know what's funny? That cake incident turned out to be one of the most important things that happened to us." He smiled faintly. "You're right. It forced me to look at myself. And it reminded me to speak with more gentleness," she said. "Sometimes I forget how much words can hurt too." He turned to her. "You've always been gentle." She shook her head. "Not always. Sometimes I sound like I'm just being practical, but maybe it comes off as cold. I never want you to feel like your efforts don't matter." Her honesty caught him off guard, but it warmed him deeply. "You've never made me feel that way," he said. "It was my own pride that made me think that." She looked up at him and smiled. "Well, I guess we both had something to learn." The night breeze moved gently through the trees as they sat in silence again. The world around them felt quiet, but inside, something was changing, a deeper bond, built from forgiveness and understanding. Later, when they went inside, she placed the new keychain on the table near the front door. "This is where I'll see it every morning," she said softly. "It'll remind me that love needs care every day, not just on anniversaries." He nodded. "That's exactly what I hoped." Before going to bed, she turned to him and said, "You know, the next time we celebrate something, let's just do it our way. No fancy gifts, no pressure. Just us," he smiled. "I'd like that. Maybe we can just bake another cake together." She laughed. "Only if you promise not to throw it." He chuckled. "Deal." They both smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like every piece of what had been broken was finally coming back together. That night, as he lay beside her, he thought about how much had changed. It wasn't just about one fight or one apology. It was about learning how to really love, to listen, to grow. He realized that love wasn't about being perfect. It was about being willing to start over, even when it was uncomfortable. It was about seeing the other person not as someone who needed fixing, but as someone worth understanding. Before falling asleep, he whispered softly, "Thank you for not giving up on me." She stirred slightly, half asleep, and murmured, "I never planned to." And that simple sentence, soft and sleepy, filled the room with warmth. The next morning, the house felt alive again. Music played softly from the kitchen radio while she cooked breakfast. He came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her gently, and said, "Smells good." She smiled. "Well, I learned from the best too." They laughed. And for a moment it felt like they were right back at the beginning. Not the beginning of their marriage, but the beginning of something new, something stronger. As they sat down to eat, he looked at her and said quietly, "You know, maybe that fight was a blessing in disguise." She looked at him amused. "A blessing?" "Yeah," he said. "It showed us what really matters." She nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. It taught us that love isn't about being right. It's about being kind," he smiled. "Exactly." And in that moment, with the morning light spilling through the window, the smell of breakfast in the air, and laughter between them again, it felt like love. Real, imperfect, forgiving, and strong.